Good morning, brothers and sisters in the Dhamma. Welcome to Buddhist Fellowship's Dhamma Talk by Dr. Yuen this morning. Before we start the service, let's pay homage to the Buddha.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Okay, today's topic we have is Anattalakkhana Sutta, the sutta on the characteristic of not self. So, Dr. Ng, may we have you on the screen, please?
Good morning. Today's topic is about Anattalakkhana Sutta. So it is Anattalakkhana Sutta. Means Atta is self, so Anatta is not or no. There's an A missing here, Anatta. Okay? So today's topic is about non-self or no self or not self. So there have been many translations of this. So it could be like no self, no not self, no soul, or not soul. So the purpose of which is to talk about the essential and that there is no permanent entity. There's no permanent entity in the mind and the body. So how did this come about? Now we talk about 2,600 years ago, where the dominant religion of the time is about soul. So we have people who believe in Brahmanism, or what we now know as Hinduism. And Brahmanism believes that there is a creator God. And this creator God creates Brahmins from his mouth, the warriors from his arms, the traders from his thighs, and the slaves from the feet. So Brahma, the creator God, create the souls into these four castes. And these souls then get reincarnated and hopefully to be reconnected with Brahma. So that was the worldview of the Brahmanism at that time, those who believe in Brahmanism. So they believe that this soul is permanent. This soul that resides in them gets reunited with Brahma. And what they do is that they speak to Brahma through sacrifices of animals. So these were their practice. Then there were a group of ascetics who moved away from Brahmanism because there were many contradictions to the beliefs. So subsequently, the ascetics, they also believe in the soul. So Jainism also believed in a soul. And this soul would be reunited with the cosmic soul if all their heavy particles of bad karma deeds were removed. And their self-mortification practice even involves starvation till death. So they believe that this soul needs to be this being needs to be self-modified in order to purify the soul, to release the soul to the cosmic soul. So they believe in a permanent entity. So the third who says that there is the soul is the one who believes in determinism. That means everything is fated. The soul has this, it just travel on its lives and then get enlightened at the end. So this determinism is that there's the soul, and the soul will be enlightened. And everything is fated. So they do not do anything because they would eventually be enlightened. And then there is the atomist who believe that there are 7 parts, 7 elements, and that one part of it is the soul and is indestructible. So for all these who believe in the soul is actually indestructible, is permanent. And this worldview is held very strongly. So at that time, so this is the soul worldview, which is also very current to the beings of today. Now, what actually helped the 5 ascetics to be released is this non-self, non-soul Sutta. So we talk about the Sutta in relation to, in a context of the time where people believe very strongly in the soul. So then I need to explain also, because this characteristic is about the 5 aggregates. Now 5 aggregates is just about the mind and the body. It's just like a compound element, you just need to split it up. So here there is the body and the mind. We only have this body and the mind. And then we further subdivide this mind into feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. If you do not like to say 5 aggregates, then you just focus that he is talking only about body and mind, just body and mind. So now, this body and mind, this self, this soul, is almost synonymous. I will use it interchangeably, but to emphasize on something, now I use the word self to emphasize on the 5 aggregates. Now, the Buddha says that we have this view that the form or the body possesses this self, this soul. And this soul possesses this body or the form. Similarly, we say that the form is in the soul, or the soul is in the form. So in other words, we are saying that this is mine, this is a possessing, this is mine, the form is mine, and that it is in me, this I am. So this is how the self-view is sort of helped. So you see, this is the first part. The form itself has 4 views already about the form. Then we say, these feelings also. I have these feelings. These feelings are in me. I possess these feelings. Don't hurt my feelings. So you see, feelings as mine. Feelings as in me, I. And so we have perceptions also. Perceptions of form, of feelings as I and mine. This goes closely together. And then we think about feelings, our perceptions. And these mental formations, our thoughts, They belong to me, my creative talent belongs to me, as I, as mine, in me, in I. The consciousness is the one that attends. The consciousness goes to the home of the body, to the feelings. Consciousness goes to the home of the body, the home of feelings, the home of perceptions, and the home of mental formations. We have to be conscious of our body. We have to be conscious of our feelings, our perceptions, our mental formations. If we are not conscious, then they are non-existent. Only when we are conscious of something, then they are in existence. Right. So consciousness is the tool for all this. They are conjoined, not disjoined. So this is how we have self, the feeling of form as self, possessing it, mind, I. So after explaining this, we go to the main body of the sutta. The Buddha then in his discourse, if you have read it, he will tell you, he analyzed for you that the 5 aggregates is not self. And he further reinforced this, that the 5 aggregates are not self. By the second characteristics, the anicca, as well as the third characteristic, suffering. So he started off with the emphasis that non-self. Then he reinforced non-self with anicca and the suffering. Then he goes on, to talk about the other characteristics. So now we go into the analysis of non-self. So what do it mean by soul? So the soul comes from a greater cosmic soul or a creator God, and this soul is able then, what is its function? Its function is that it's able to direct the body and the mind. So he simply based on this view at that time, he then come to the statement, the body is not self. If it is the self, if it is the soul, it can then, if it is a soul, he says, if the body is the self or soul, it can direct it not to have dis-ease. If the body is the soul, is the self, is a permanent entity, it can direct the body not to have dis-ease. It can tell the body, be this or be that, because it's the soul. Now, if it is the self, so we take it as like another. If the apartment, if your apartment belongs to you, then you can do anything you like to it. Agree? Now, but this body, this house is not yours. It's not yours. You cannot say to do this and do that. You cannot say that I don't want to have COVID. If the conditions are there, you will have COVID. If you do not observe safe distancing, if you do not observe seclusion, if you do not practice hygiene and you contact people in the community who may have COVID, because there's ignorance, then this body will lead itself to disease. It's just as simple as this. So, if body itself, it can direct it to be this or that. But because the body is not self, it leads to disease, to this is. It cannot say that I don't want to be this or that. So you can see, so he emphasized the body is not self. Because it can lead to disease. You cannot want it to be this or that. It's conditions. So, the conditions for the brewing of COVID are there. And if it gets disease, it's because of depending on conditions. So similarly, he talked about feelings. So he said, if feeling is the self or the soul, then it can direct it not to have disease. You should not direct, you should be able to direct it not to have painful feelings. But it cannot. If it cannot, then it does not have a self or a soul. So this is his analysis. And he went on to say, perception is, if the perception is self, it should not lead to disease. It can direct it not to have disease. But because it's not self, it leads to disease. Similarly for thoughts, it's because of conditions that we have sadness, despair, depression, because of all the things that are happening. You cannot help but being sad. So these are beyond your control. It's conditions. There's no self. If there's a self, it can direct the thoughts or the mental formations not to have disease. So similarly, the consciousness is also not self. It leads to disease. If there is a self, it should not lead to disease. So this is the Buddha's analysis of not self. So we think about it. If it's a self, it's a soul, you can direct it. But because you cannot direct it, we have disease to our body, to our feelings, to our perceptions, to our mental formations, and to our consciousness. Because we have disease, then these 5 aggregates are not self. So, this is just purely analytical that you can think of, you can accept or not. And COVID is a Dharma messenger. It tells us very clearly that these 5 aggregates are subjected to suffering because of conditions. So now we go to another part where he emphasized very strongly about non-self. So he says, non-self, the characteristics of existence. Then he asked, is the body permanent? He asked the bhikkhus. So you ask yourself, is your body permanent? Now there are many news of COVID. One day here, next day gone. So we have the 32-year-old Indian national, right? One day here and next day gone. So is the body permanent? So it is impermanent. So if it is impermanent, is it suffering? Now, here we say suffering, there are 3 definitions of suffering. So there is the dukkha, dukkhata, the dukkha sankhara, and the dukkha parinama. So dukkha, dukkhata is birth, aging, disease, and death. Dukkha sankhara is this in addition to sadness, sorrow, agitation, despair, distress, or depression. But dukkha parinama, parinama means change or stress. Any change is called dukkha. So he would ask this question. So he says, is body permanent? Is impermanent? Then it is dukkha. So if it is impermanent, is it dukkha? Is it suffering? Is it suffering? Then he says, the bhikkhu says suffering. So if something is impermanent, is suffering, is there something permanent there like a soul? You already have said that the body is impermanent and is suffering. So do you consider this as belonging to mind? And it is I, when it is impermanent? When something is impermanent, you cannot catch it. It's too fast, like the wind, you cannot catch it. No, it is very, very fast, something that is impermanent. So you can say that if it is impermanent, it is not so, because so is permanent. And it is suffering. If what is impermanent and suffering, do you like to consider this as belonging to mind? Is it I? As the view as form possessing self as form, or form in self and self in form? It is changing all the time. Which one is your form? Which one is your self? There is no self. The form is changing. There is no self. You cannot put something in a changing form. So you cannot say that this is mine, because there is no self. It's not I. So it is impermanent. It's impermanent and it's changing. So he emphasized the non-self. So you see, first he says this, then he reinforced non-self. He reinforced non-self by saying that these 5 aggregates, this mind and body, is impermanent, is suffering. And what is impermanent and suffering should not be considered as mine, as I, as something permanent. So this is what he says. This is the first part, the analysis. Then he emphasized with the second. Then he says pigs. Now, what is pigs? He says these 3 characteristics, in the sense of pigs, P-I-G-S, past, present, and future, will have these 3 characteristics. Internal and external sense bases will have these characteristics of anicca, dukkha, anatta. And whether it's gross or subtle, it will have this characteristic. And whether it's superior or inferior, they are of these characteristics. So the Buddha says, at all times, in all places, far and near, in all times, in all places, in whatever characteristic, superior, inferior, gross or subtle, divine or hellish or gross, that they are all impermanent, non-self, and dukkha. And so, we should not cling to the 5 aggregates. Otherwise, we will be like pigs, eating and sleeping and coming back life after life. So this is what he exhorted a slave who became a monk. And then after that, he indulges in sleep and was snoring when the Buddha was discoursing. And so this particular bhikkhu woke up when the Buddha says, do not be like a pig, eating and sleeping, and coming to rebirth again and again. So we must put this circuit blocker to samsara. And how we put this circuit blocker to samsara is to stop thinking that there is a soul or a self in the 5 aggregates. And once you do not hold on to the 5 aggregates, because they cannot be held on to, it's impermanent. It's like the wind or the water or the sunshine. It cannot hold it. And so if you cannot hold it, you have to let it go, disenchanted, dispassion, then we will be released. And so the 5 ascetics, Kondana, Asaji, right, Padiya, Mahanama, and Vapa, listening to this discourse, their hearts are free of clinging to the 5 aggregates. So we emphasize here that the view of a soul has to be smashed in our path to enlightenment. And for these 5 ascetics, it is only this that they need to smash. They need to smash the self-view. So in the self-view, they then have but this burden. So this burden is the ignorance that lead to volition, that lead to consciousness, that lead to the mind-body, descend to the mind-body, to the six sense bases, to the contact, to feelings, to craving, to clinging, to becoming, then birth, and a whole lot of suffering. He says there is no creator. It is just dependent on conditions. When you have this, that will arise. When you do not have this, that would not arise. So if you don't have this, that won't arise. So it's just depending on conditions. So similarly, your five aggregates depends on conditions. So the origin of the five aggregates, and then the cessation. So you have the body, is the elements. So you have feeling, perception, mental formation from contact. Then you have the consciousness, because we have a mind and body. So this body, the elements will cease one day. So it will cease. You can see ceasing is breath in, breath out. The first breath have gone, no? And the postures have changed, the activities have ceased, and the context keeps changing. Because context keeps changing, your feeling, perception, mental formations will change. And so your consciousness too. So it will cease. So here we have the Four Noble Truths, origin and cessation. And that you have to see this clearly, the Eightfold Noble Path. So the Eightfold Noble Path is to have right understanding and right thoughts. Right understanding is ignorance of what? Of self, of soul, of suffering. If you see the Four Noble Truths, you see suffering, the source of suffering is that there is a self. So in the beginning, one may have the burden of the self as a gross self. So how did they smash it, the five ascetics? So they lose the sense of the gross self. The gross self. This gross self, so-called, or the soul, it continues on with a sense of conceit and ego. And that's when there's the Arahants smash the sense of conceit. Because this self, this gross self, in the first instance, for the Aryan, the stream enterer, this self, the Sakaya Ditti, is abandoned. They don't see there's a soul there. Things are impermanent. Anicca, dukkha, anatta. So they let go of the sense of self. Self is abandoned. And only the Buddha gives this kind of discourse in the entire world. So there is no, and the Buddha, you don't doubt, no doubt in the Buddha's teaching. Then there is the traditions of soul, worldview of soul, all that, or rites and rituals are abandoned. So this is the first stage. The second stage, this person still have attachment and aversion. Attachment and aversion are two sides of the coin, but they still have the coin. They still have the self. So they still have this sense of self in them. They're still clinging on to the 5 aggregates. Then the third will then lose, abandon the AA, aversion and attachment. And the Arahants will abandon CRI, cry. If you don't abandon CRI, they are not Arahants. So restlessness, they have abandoned. Ignorance, they have abandoned. And they also have abandoned the Rupa jhanas and the Arupa jhanas. This going there is intoxicating. It says you also have to abandon because of self. There's this self still clings to all this. So it's all about self. So if you do not cling to the self, so clinging to the 5 aggregates. These 5 aggregates, the form, the feeling, the perception, the mental formation, and the consciousness. To each of these 5 aggregates, if we cling on and do not see its impermanent nature, its cessation, then you will not be released. So you have to see it again and again, the impermanent nature, its cessation. You have to be secluded. Then you can see clearly the cessation and its release. So it is the clinging to the 5 aggregates, because we are attached to our mind and body. But the Buddha very, very clearly says that these 5 aggregates are a burden. They are fragile. They are unstable. They are not to be clung to. Only if we have ignorance, then we are clinging to. So we have to smash this ignorance. We have to do this circuit blocker. You have to stop it. And then what is this? We all always say it's that the highly misbehaving uncle will feed the ignorance, the hindrances of sense, desires, lust, hatred, delusion. Because it's a delusion to have or moha to have this self. So when they smash this self, then they realized. Because they have very little attachment, they are ascetics practicing self-mortification. So when they lose the view of the self, then they realized. So we must learn how to smash ignorance. Okay, so here we have What happened to my green? No good, is it? So evil, and if you evil, you listen not to the Dharma, so you will have lack of faith. You have careless attention, and then you are not mindful, unrestrained, misconduct. Then you have the hindrances. So you have sense, desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness, and doubt. So if you have good friends, and Sangha, and you listen to the Dharma, and you increase your faith, and you are careful, you are mindful, you are restrained, you have good behavior, you overcome your hindrances by the 4 foundations of mindfulness, develop the 7 factors of enlightenment, then you smash this. So when you do not have this, you do not go down to the suffering route. So in every sutta, the Buddha encompasses the 4 noble truths, the 3 characteristics of existence, and the 12 DO. So this is the topic on Anattalakkhana Sutta. So just to summarize, the non-self analysis, if there's a soul, it can direct it, but because you cannot direct the body to not to be diseased, then there is no soul, no self. You also cannot direct your mind not to be diseased, and so there is no soul. And that there is no soul because it is the 5 aggregates, the body is impermanent, the mind is impermanent, and it is changing all the time, so there is nothing permanent, there is no soul. It will be such for all times, past, present, future, internal, external, far or near, gross or subtle, in whatever heavenly realms, it will also be impermanent, so superior or inferior, so it will be such. And if it is such, you cannot hold on to them because it's impermanent. So, being disenchanted, dispassion, then one will be released from this attachment. So to see it requires sila, samadhi, panya. And you need to have good friends and sangha, listen to the Dhamma, read the suttas, so that you can have increased faith and careful attention, and that you would not be mindless, you will not be unrestrained, you will not misbehave in body, speech, or mind, and you overcome the 5 hindrances with the 4 foundations of mindfulness, to develop the 7 factors of enlightenment, to smash ignorance. Okay, that's all. Is it too heavy?
Thank you, Dr. Ng. We have a few questions here. Is there a difference in the way one realizes anatta and anicca? In this sutta, the Buddha started with anatta rather than anicca, whereas other suttas start with anicca. Is there any reason for this?
So you see these 5 ascetics already sort of have very little attachment. So their attachments, what are the taints? The taints that normal, ordinary human beings have are the taints of sense pleasures, views, becoming, and ignorance. So what do they have? So the Buddha targeted at his audience. So these people do not have, desire for sense pleasures, but they have atta view still. They want to be enlightened. They still have ignorance. They have all these 3. Now, they are practitioners. They would have been in nature. And nature is a great announcer of anicca. They would be in the forest. They will be able to see the wind, see the changing nature. If they have been immersed in the changing nature, this subject, anicca, may not put the nail in the coffin, may not be the circuit breaker. So you must use another characteristic. And the characteristic is non-self. In the end, it's non-self. They have very little dust in their eyes. And he then say, the Buddha says it as a matter of fact. This body itself, this body is soul. Then you can direct it what? You can direct it to be this and that. But precisely, the body is not soul. So he smashed this atta view. So he needs to smash this atta view. They all know that it is impermanent. They know things are impermanent. The Buddha needs to smash the atta view. He says, analyze to them. Your feelings are so meh? So then you can direct it to be happy all the time. That everything is a rose garden. It's heavenly, it's divine all the time. You can direct it this way. If there is a soul. If there's a soul, you can direct your body, your feeling, your perception, your mental, your formations, your consciousness to be this or to be that. Can you? This is a statement to 5 ascetics. And it comes very naturally when he then reinforced the second part. That is anicca, right? So it's the 5 aggregates anicca. And it's the 5 aggregates impermanent. So he puts the nail on the coffin by this, that they see very clearly. But for us, who are so attached to the self, then we have to see impermanence first. To see impermanent, and so it is not self. So it's the approach to the target audience. Whatever it is the 3 characteristics, not short of 1. It's just the presentation and the emphasis.
Thank you, Dr. Ng. A self that is constantly changing is still a self that changes. So is no self a good translation of anatta?
Say again.
A self that is constantly changing is still a self that changes. So is no self or not self a good translation of anatta?
So this is a contradictory statement. So this statement, the self is constantly changing, is still self. So we all have emphasized that when it is self or the soul is permanent. So when it's constantly changing, it contradicts this. So it is not self. Not self. This that you see exteriorly is the form, is your body, is your mind, of feelings, perceptions, mental formations, consciousness. Your body changes, there is no soul, there is no self. The mind changes faster than the body. It has no soul, it has no self. So we all have this definition on the outset already. The definition is that the form, all these form, you see them as this. This is the untrained person seeing this. The 5 ascetics see this too, in this way. The Buddha tells us, if we use the premise, we use the same definition, that the soul or the self, the meaning of soul and self is equivalent to permanent entity, then we cannot use it synonymous with things that are changing, because it's opposite of each other. Like something is permanent and something is impermanent. We cannot use it by the language itself. In front of the permanent, there's a I am. So language-wise, this statement contradicts. So what is so you want to talk about semantics. So not self or non-self. So Singaporeans like to use as short as possible, no self, no, 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 N-O. No. You want to add a not, you can. This one, atas English, England, not self. You can use it, but you can, how it speaks to you is more important than the language. No self, no soul, it's just a language. It's just lip service. But you have to see it for yourself, that there is no self, there is no soul. That what all this happening is that there is no thing there. So whether there's a tea to eat, when there's more letters or more something, there is something. But actually there's nothing. Before I put something on the board, there was nothing on the board. We just create. So we just want to emphasize the essence, that things are impermanent, it's changing. And this COVID thing is very, very dharmic speaking, because it's changing. The figures are changing. It reaches a peak, it comes down. Or it flattens. Depend on the wisdom, whether there is ignorance or not. So it speaks, whether there's ignorance and there is suffering. When there's ignorance, there's bound to be suffering. So this is my take on it.
So, Dr. Ng, when you say no self or not self, does it mean no permanent self? Is that correct? So we just take it as there is no permanent self.
There is no permanent anything.
Yes.
So all conditioned things are impermanent.
Somebody asked, I would like to understand form in self and self in form. Can you explain that again?
So form in self. So you either you feel form in self. How do you form? How do you feel that there is a form in self? So you have this integration of form and self. You feel this form integrated in your self. And this self is integrated with your form. So when you say, I am this, you feel it integrated. I have this sickness. This sickness is in me. This form in self, or I look like this. My appearance is like this. I have this form that I'm very big size. I must shrink it to the skinny, teeny, weeny size. So this form in self and this self in form, you see this view of yourself. So this is a view. So form in self. So people get anorexic because they see themselves in this way, in the form in self and the self in form. But it is a delusional sort of seeing.
Thank you, Dr. Ng. For non-Arahant, upon death, if all the aggregates cease, as you have explained, then what is carried over to the next birth?
For non-Arahant?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have this, don't know can see or not. Never mind. Can you see this? So we have this 12DO. So we have 12DO. It says for the non-Arahants. So when a person dies, you have this 6 sense base, right? So when a person dies, your consciousness leaves the 5 sense bases. So you have the left with the 6 sense base, and that would be your mind base, your mind consciousness, your mind object. So we want to talk about this. So 6 sense base. So we have the sense base, like the ear, eye, etc., the 5 senses, and then the mind base. Okay? Bases, base. Then we have the objects. So we have the sound, sight, etc. So we have the mind object. Then we have the consciousness. So we have the ear consciousness with the eye consciousness, we have the mind consciousness. Okay? So we just use these two. When we die, we are no longer conscious of our five senses. So we are left with this mind base. Okay, so the mind base will go, and the mind consciousness, how does this work? Contact. You contact only when the consciousness join your sense base with the sense object. Like the ear will listen to the sound, and the ear consciousness attends to it. So you have no more of this already. But now you have this mind base, and then the mind object, and the mind consciousness. Okay? So you have this. If you still have ignorance, the mind consciousness will descend and look for a nama rupa. Because it still have intentions. If you have intentions, means you have craving. You have craving. As long as you delight, as long as this ignorance of Four Noble Truths, of suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path. So as long as there is a craving and there is a delight, this will give you formations, mental formations. And these mental formations will go and look for its object of attachment. Its object of attachment, you will look, depends on what your inclination is, what is your practice. If you are very virtuous, regardless of your religion, you will be like oil. When you're thrown into the water, you float up. But if you have bad tendencies, unwholesome tendencies, then it will be gravel. Then a very strong object that sinks. So you go to the lower realms. But if you have, other tendencies like jhanas or arupa jhanas, and still have those tendencies, then your tendencies will go and look for those contacts. Once your consciousness comes out, it's borderless. It's now bodiless. So it's all immeasurable. It just float and look. It has this bird's eye view, and you look for its attachment. Then it will just zoom in and descend on the ingredients, and then it go deep down. So the Buddha says consciousness is a spill. Spill you 100 in the morning, 100 in the afternoon, and 100 in the night. If you get spilled, but you think it's delightful, so you want to be spilled in, and then you acquire, your faculties descend, you acquire the sixth sense space, you acquire the 5 aggregates, and voila, you are then take rebirth. So this is what happened. But if you see clearly that all this ends, so the contact, you see it very clearly that this is impermanent, and all these pains, all these sensual desires, delight, they are all COVID. they are all, going to cause you suffering. All these views will all cause you suffering. All this becoming to whatever divine states will cause you suffering, because they are all impermanent. So then you will come again. But if you see impermanence, you see non-self, then when the time comes, if you are very present in the moment, then in the moment the Buddha says, you must be mindful of death. Death happens in the moment. If you are in hurry to see what's the next thing, then you have the bhava tanha. What's the next thing? You are hurried to see, Oh, so beautiful, the bright light. The bright light is just consciousness. So you just move. But if you see that if everything is impermanent and suffering and non-self, then you don't need to go. It's going to be impermanent. So you just stay where you are in the present. The last breath, where it stops, the consciousness stops there, and that's it. End. There's no more, going or moving forwards. So this is what the Buddha, says. We have tendencies, we go for it. So there's this movement. So you don't need to die to see. You have to see it before you die, so that you won't be tricked at death.
So Dr. Ng, to simplify it, can we say that karma is the one that is carried over on to the next birth?
Yes, the Buddha says it's your karmic tendencies. So your karmic tendencies is actually volition. If your tendencies is to be generous, is to be open-hearted, is to be happy, then you would have those tendencies. So if you are angry, then there may be an angry baby comes out. So in a family there may be many, many children, but they all have different tendencies. So karmic tendencies. So those people who can now play the piano or musical instruments, because their tendencies are conditioned repeatedly. So when they listen to that sound, they know how to play it. So this is evidence, inferred evidence of past lives. So you have to do good, you get good results. So the Buddha says, volition is two strong men. They still bring you to the charcoal pit if you still have volition.
Thank you, Dr. Ng. Of the 5 aggregates, consciousness seems to be the constant or a trigger point compared to the other aggregates. Would you then say it is permanent?
Consciousness is not permanent. So the 5 aggregates are not permanent, including consciousness. So now you see how your consciousness works. So you can hear the sound. So you hear your ear consciousness contact the sound at your ear, but the ear consciousness has ceased when I'm not providing the conditions for the sound. So the consciousness arises because of conditions. It ceases because of conditions. Consciousness has to be seen. Your 5 sense consciousness has to be seen to see that it ceased. When you sleep at night, are you conscious of what's happening to your body? Then did you say your mind consciousness? Can we say your mind consciousness ceased also? So how can you say that consciousness is permanent? When we are awake, we are conscious. We are conscious to the 5 sense objects, to our 5 internal sense spaces. We are conscious of our mind base, our mind objects, our clinging, our suffering, our hindrances. So these are mind objects that come and go. And the consciousness, the mind consciousness, attend to them and move off. Attend to them and move off. So it arises and ceases. Just like a ball, we bounce it, it touches, it lands. You know, it's just if you move it. If you're not moving it, it's not there. So consciousness is never permanent. If it is permanent, then this Anattalakkhana Sutta tells you very, very clearly the 5 aggregates are impermanent. You cannot say that, oh, consciousness is the only thing that seems to be a constant. The consciousness is a tool to be conscious of the feelings, conscious of our perceptions, is conscious of our thoughts, conscious of our consciousness. It's all-encompassing. We have this body and we have a mind, and so whether we are conscious or not. So there's a BBC news, right, recently. They said this persistent vegetative state, that they don't seem to be conscious of what people are saying. But when they do the functional MRI, it shows that those called persistent vegetative states that's totally dependent on others for their activities of daily living can respond by communicating with them. But outwardly we cannot see. So it arises and ceases, arises and ceases. So all this consciousness, you have to know it very clearly for yourself. All 5 aggregates have to be known. Because if they are not known, then you may be clinging to one of the aggregate, and that may be consciousness. That consciousness is that thing that appears to be forever. We are not conscious forever. We switch off, sometimes. It ceases when we sleep. We are not conscious of many things. If you are very conscious, those who are very conscious, very mindful in their sleep, they are practitioners. They are very strong practitioners.
So it's still ever-changing. Thank you, Dr. Ng. Last 2 questions. Is it right to say the non-self mainly refers to understanding of the body and mind of oneself, inwardly perceiving object and subject outwardly? It does not refer to the external worldly phenomena like iceberg melting, climate change as non-self.
Can I read? Wow, a lot of words. Say again.
Is it right to say that the non-self sutta actually refers to the understanding of the body and mind, inwardly perceiving an object and outwardly a subject? So it does not refer to the external phenomena itself, like icebergs melting, climate change, as not self.
Not referring to
external worldly phenomena.
The non-self characteristics refers to all conditioned things. So it will refer to all external phenomena. And all internal phenomena of your body and of the external. This body is a conditioned being. It's a conditioned being, so external also of condition. Why are there all these climate changes? Because of conditions, because of ignorance. People do, unwholesome things. So because of unwholesome things, or they don't know that this will cause climate change, pollution, etc., and they continue to do it in the search for greed, insatiable greed. And then sometimes they fight, they destroy, they bomb, hatred, because they have a delusion that there is an I. But all conditioned things, climate change, is because of conditions. Depending on conditions, things comes about. So there are multiple causes for climate changes. There are multiple causes for all these, viruses that come about. There are most of these, if you go down to the root, because man is overly greedy, overly ill will, and that they are deluded, there is a I, me, and mine. So they destroy. So there is no difference outside and inside, because the inside is a manifestation of also the outside. So you must know your own world, because you contribute to the outer world. You have to see whether you contribute to all these other things through your own ignorance of, So we all know what are the contributing factors, and whether we contribute to this. We are all interrelated. All the realms are all interrelated. Through the realms, we are interrelated with our ancestors, with the devas, etc. To the external world, we are interrelated. Any sneeze in China will come to Singapore. We are all interrelated. So this is not non-self. These are changing. This is changing nature. There's no self in it. There's no personal thing in it. All these are non-self. There's nothing personal. It's not a US virus or it's not a Chinese virus. It's just conditions that bring it about. Then one has to examine what are those conditions. So these conditions, unwholesome conditions, so you want to look at the whole unwholesome line, and then you want to bring about all the wholesome conditions. So there's unwholesome and there's wholesome. So it is non-self. It is conditions. It is depending on conditions. So it applies inside as well as outside. It is a characteristic of existence.
Thank you, Dr. Ng. Last question. How can I apply this knowledge in school or the workplace, which advocates competition, advancement, and progress? Is it realistic to apply not self in this case? Thank you.
So if you treasure yourself, you would want to apply non-self. Because we have said that when you have this self, you will have a lot of suffering. Because you will be clinging to yourself to achieve your own goals. If you want to achieve your own goals, then you have to consider very clearly whether you are walking the noble Eightfold Path or not. If you want to walk the Noble Eightfold Path, then you must have a right understanding. So this right understanding is right understanding of these three characteristics of anicca, dukkha, anatta. That it is clinging to this view of atta that you will achieve. But at the end of life, the Buddha has said, so that the life is unstable, it's anicca, that it's unstable and it is not sheltered. If you have COVID, you will suffer, mild, moderate, or severe. And if you die with nothing. But people have this insatiable desire, insatiable craving. Even when we say all this is happening, they think of one thing. One thing, they have one thing, self, my name, my fame, my gain, my pleasure. All this enhance the self. What is most important, that all these are unstable. Pride comes before a fall. You want to reach the top of the ladder, but that is also impermanent. After you reach the top, you can fall down. So the Buddha says, all these impermanent things, clinging to all this causes you suffering, life after life after life. You must put a stop. You must put a circuit breaker if you do not want to suffer. But if you want to suffer, then you will have this view, when you have a wrong view, that this will lead you to happiness, then this wrong view will lead you to the wrong path. You must do things with the right understanding. What you do does not cause suffering to yourself or to another or to society. You must have right thoughts that you abandon sense desires for your own gains, for these gains. You must not be cruel to yourself. By doing this and then letting others fall or suffer because of your rise to the top, you are actually being cruel to yourself in this life and the afterlife. You are not walking the Noble Eightfold Path. So you have to consider very carefully your every action, every speech, and every formation. Because this will lead you, if you have a lot of craving, will lead you to a whole load of suffering again and again. So it's up to you. We have choices. So they say choices. You can live a noble life. You don't need to climb to the top and causing other people to suffer or yourself to suffer. You can do it within your precepts. You must make sure that when it's not within your precepts, it's blameless, it's wholesome, it's superior. So you must be able to be discerning because you have the wisdom to create good karma for yourself, to have a win-win situation in this life and the afterlife, if there is an afterlife. So it's entirely choices.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ng. We
No
shall-
more?
Yes, no more questions.
Okay.
We shall share merits with all sentient beings, especially all our healthcare workers, police and contact tracers, and authorities who have been working hard behind the scenes, as well as those who are infected with the COVID-19 virus. May the situation improve and those who are infected recover soon.
Dedication of merits. Etavata cha amhehi sampatam punya sampatam sabe deva anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cha amhehi sampatam punya sampatam sabe buddha anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cha amhehi sampatam punya sampatam sabe satta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Idame nyatidam hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idame nyatidam hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idame nyatidam hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Closing homage. Arahan Sama Sambuddho Bhagava Buddham Bhagavantam Avivademi. Bow. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhamman Namasami. Bow. Supatipano Bhagavato Savakasanho Sangham Namami. Bow. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.